Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday worship at the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. My name is Guy, and I am delighted to be your worship associate this morning. Wherever and whenever you are taking part in this worship celebration, you are welcome here. We acknowledge that our FirstU campus is located on traditional, unsurrendered, and unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and that the work of reconciliation is a responsibility of our congregation and of all Canadians. Our goal is to educate ourselves and all who have ears to hear, to be of service to those who are at risk, and to advocate for justice. Please take care and take advantage of online opportunities at FirstU to stay in touch during this protracted pandemic. If you are new to FirstU and would like to learn more about us, please contact us through our email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa, all one word, .ca. Following our service, please join us as well for hospitality hour. And now, here is Phil from our board of directors with announcements for today. Phil?
Thank you, Guy. There are two announcements. The nominating committee is seeking congregants interested in filling an upcoming vacancy on our board of directors as of our May 1st AGM. Contact the chair of the nominating committee, Joe Connor, for more details. His phone number and email address are in the member directory and in the EUU. And the second is from the Environmental Action Group. If food loss and waste were a country, it would be the third biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. There is an Earth Speaks forum coming this Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. on Zoom. The invited speaker is Madison Mcguire from Second Harvest. She will be speaking about food waste and what we can do about it. It's free to attend, and registration details are on our website. As well, in the EUU and on the climate action page, see our prevention of food waste hints. Join our food waste advocacy. Thank you.
During the continuing pandemic, we encourage you to sign up to receive the EUU, our weekly email newsletter, to check our Facebook and Instagram pages, and our website for notices and updates. Our calendar continues to be as full as ever, albeit much of it online. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love, and however you identify, today you are part of our spiritual community.
Bonjour, mes amis. Good morning, one and all. We are here together virtually, but still here together. I'm the Reverend Eric, this faith community's lead pastor. The so-called freedom convoy may be gone, but so much remains at play in our wider world. Threats of imminent war, the global pandemic still with us, vaccines still not universally available across the globe. Yet let us take some time to pause, to breathe, so that we may together reflect on who we are and what we can uniquely give to the wider world. In that spirit, this morning, we light our chalice to these words by Rabindranath Tagore. The same stream of life that runs through my veins, night and day, runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death, in ebb and flow. My limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of ages, dancing in my blood this moment. chalice flame is low, but it's glowing, it's lit. And now our opening hymn, For the Earth Forever Turning.
For the earth forever turning, for the skies, for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures, in their silent majesty, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our blue-green hills of earth.
Our call to worship this morning is adapted from words by Angela Herrera. Don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards and the world needs its vision. Bring them with you and your joy and your passion. Bring your loving and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your powers to heal. There is work to do, and we have all you need to do it right here as we have gathered. Come, let us worship together.
I am Reverend Ellen Bell. I am the spiritual care visitor for this congregation. At this time in the service, we accept personal joys and sorrows, and we recognize these by placing stones in water and allowing the ripples to take the wishes out to the universe where they may be either congratulated or commiserated with. We have a stone of sorrow this morning. One of our former music directors, Jane Perry, who many of you will undoubtedly remember well, is recovering from surgery for colon cancer. So we wish her a speedy recovery. A stone of hope and peace that the situation going on in downtown Ottawa will be sorted out peacefully and soon. And as Reverend Eric has mentioned, the pandemic is still with us. So we hope people will still be vigilant as we try to get through this very long time. And one last stone for all the joys and sorrows kept in our hearts. We will now have a moment of silence.
Carl, you're on mute. Can you restart the video when you've unmuted yourself?
Of elephants, African and Asian, and more than 600 kinds of oak trees. Hi to everyone, it's Nao, your Director of Religious Exploration. I hope everyone's doing really great on this Sunday. Today I'm reading to you a story and it's titled Many, the Diversity of Life on Earth. How many different kinds of living things are there on our planet? There are many. There are so many, from big things like elephants and oak trees. Did you know that there are 2 kinds of elephants, African and Asian, and more than 600 kinds of oak trees? To small things like mushrooms and microbes. So far, scientists have counted 100,000 kinds of mushrooms and microbes. Microbes are so small that you need a microscope to see them. There can be 500 kinds in just 1 teaspoon of dirt. Everywhere you look, there are living things, in deserts, on islands, far out at sea. Under the feathers of birds and on the backs of beetles, even in places where you think nothing at all could live, like boiling volcanoes. Counting how many kinds there are can be difficult because some places are hard to look in, like the top of tall trees in the jungle or the bottom of the coldest seas. There are so many living things. So far, human beings have found and counted almost 2 million different kinds of living things, but that's only the start. There could be many million more. Thousands of new species are found each year. And the more we find, the more we learn about how living things depend on one another for food, places to live, and for ways to grow. Jaguars eat pacas, which eat the fruit and seeds from trees. Hummingbirds eat insects and nectar, and insects eat nectar. Toucans live in tree holes. Some bats bite holes in leaves, so they droop to make a tent. Pacas poop out the tree seeds they have eaten, which grow into new trees. Baby frogs grow in pools of water in leaves. Bees carry pollen to flowers, which allow flowers to grow to seeds. We have learned that every kind of living thing is part of a big, beautiful, complicated pattern. The trouble is, all over the world, human beings are destroying pieces of the pattern. Chemicals poison the air. Fishing boats take too much from the sea. People build roads that divide roads into pieces, causing animals and plants to disappear. Many kinds of living things have already been lost. Some have disappeared before we've had a chance to find them. Human beings are part of the pattern too, and we need to make sure it stays big, beautiful, and complicated. Because we could not keep living on Earth if we had to count down instead of up. I hope you enjoyed that story. Wishing everyone a really great Sunday. Please check out the EUU. We do have RE programming happening at the church every Sunday.
Good to go, Mike.
Thank you. It's been a little over 2 years since this congregation wisely decided to make the climate crisis its congregational focus. It was the fall of 2019, and we remember Greta Thunberg racing across the North Atlantic, stomping into the United Nations, and screaming, "How dare you?" A couple weeks later, 1 million Canadians took to the streets to demand real climate action. It seems so long ago, but fast forward to today. The pandemic is easing, and the situation reminds me a lot of the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities. And because dealing with a crisis involves, by necessity, a sober assessment of what we're up against, I'll have to start with explaining why this is the worst of times. World leaders, at least the reasonably responsible ones, have been telling us that climate change is an existential threat and code red for humanity. But to a considerable extent, the lack of details around these proclamations hide the severity of our predicament. It's the details around climate change which are arguably the hardest to face. Most sobering are the many so-called feedback loops. Methane heats the planet, and it heats the permafrost, and then the permafrost releases more methane. The heating planet has less snow, so it reflects less sun, so it warms up more. Heat amps up forest fires, and they burn more, and they release more CO2. At my last count, in my reading, I think there's about a dozen of these loops going. Now, they can't go on, obviously. There's a point where we're not driving the bus anymore, and the planet keeps heating beyond our control and takes a lot of species with it, including the one that caused climate change in the first place. This sobering news aside, there is a great best of times angle to this story. All over the world, constructive people and groups are working diligently to alleviate this crisis. Unfortunately, all this takes time, and we all need to be all in on stopping what's happening. Encouragingly, some very recent science suggests that the planet will right itself and the heating will stop if we just have the wisdom to stop treating the atmosphere like a giant cesspool. I'll close by talking about the great work of Unitarians and this congregation in particular. Over the past couple years, we've demonstrated, we've signed petitions, we've had letters signed by the board, and we've started taking work on developing programs, and we've launched some great projects like Ajaski, for instance. I think very encouraging is the fact that Canadian Unitarians have launched an 8th principle with a call to action. How long can it be before a call to action is extended to the 7th principle? It's greatly needed. The 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. We're all doing the right things. Let's all be strong and resolute and keep doing what we know has to be done. Chi miigwech.
Thank you, Mike. Our reading today is from Hope Matters by Ellen Kelsey. Individual environmental actions, even when they feel way too small, matter far more than we might realize. A growing number of studies critically analyze which individual actions have the greatest collective positive environmental impact. Top of the list, live car-free, avoid air travel, eat a plant-based diet, don't waste food, ditch single-use plastics, and push for earth-friendly policies. So how do we find the hope we need to make these impactful changes in our everyday lives? Hope researcher Shane Lopez spent many years collaborating with his mentor, Rick Snyder, a pioneer in the scientific study of hope. Cognition is the mental act of knowing. Hope, they argued, is not simply an emotion. but rather a cognitive process, a way of thinking that influences our emotions. Hope, they said, is something we actively create when we have goals we care deeply about, real plans to reach them, and the motivation and ability to accomplish them. We can think our way into feeling hopeful. You've probably heard the expression, where there's a will, there's a way. Rick famously used it to frame his goal-directed concept of hope, which he called hope theory. Hope requires both the will, the motivation and ability to make something happen, and the way, plans and strategies to pursue those desired goals. Hope, from this perspective, requires us to believe that our actions might help to change things for the better, and also to believe we have the capacity to plan and carry out those actions.
Thank you, Jen, Guy, Mike. In case you missed it, our theme this morning is titled Hallowed Ground, followed by a question mark, and with the subtitle, The Continuing Education of a Liberal Religious Pastor. When my 2-week interview with you in this faith community began last spring, I had just preached on Earth Day at the congregation I then served. Given the timing, I found it both troubling and ironic that the question you asked me during those weeks that I gave the least satisfying response to was on the subject of the global climate crisis. I simply hadn't kept up on the science. Yes, I had cheered on Greta Thunberg, but I hadn't kept up on the specifics of what to do as a citizen, let alone religious leader, to work against the tide of human behaviors causing and perpetuating the climate crisis. This morning, I'm not here to tell you that I've completed an accelerated doctoral program in climate science, or have any definitive answers on how to motivate people, let alone governments or corporations around the world to change their ways. Instead, I want to share some of my thinking, hopes, and concerns about the plight of our ecosphere, and an idea or two about how we might bring more light to understanding and motivate more of us to change our ways, in line with the old slogan, living perhaps more simply so that others may simply live. This will be the first of at least 2 worship services devoted to how we might best to work together to at least slow, if not reverse, global climate change. The next service in this series will be on Sunday before the 52nd observance of Earth Day, which happens to be Easter Sunday. Anyone interested in joining me in practicing resurrection? Now, when I think of climate change, there's a single moment I cannot escape from. I was in a seminary seminar on deep ecology led by Joanna Macy. We were in a small group discussion in the moment. The class was attended by students from all over what was then Berkeley, California's Graduate Theological Union. In my small group was a man from the small island nation of Tonga. What's the highest elevation in Tonga? I asked him. And his response was something like this. Well, there's a volcano that must reach at least 1,000 meters, but no one can live there. The highest elevation of Tongatapu, the island where our capital is only a couple hundred feet. The city extends up from the shoreline. I asked, if the Pacific Ocean were to rise, what would the effect of that be for all of you? and a look on his face in response was one I'll never forget. After several long moments, he replied, "We have our work cut out for us then." When I came of age, nuclear proliferation was at the challenge of the day. Sane and freeze were the catchwords of the moment. Before I could drive, I would ask my parents to take me to lectures about it at a local college nearby. As the months went on, it seemed to me that folks maybe were listening to all the talk that I was involved in, that cooler heads were slowly prevailing. As the years went on, I grew a bit beyond perceived immediacy of each and every crisis that's so common in youth. So later still, in the aftermath of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, when I was asked to speak to a group of youth at our local library, I prepared a talk on how, despite everything, humans tend to muddle through. It wasn't a message I was necessarily satisfied with, but it seemed at least honest. The last thing I wanted to offer these youth were empty promises. I figured high school youth could handle it, could relate to parents and people of their generation not having all the answers. Of course, when I entered the room to find the youth were actually third graders, I had to change track, but that's a story for another day. The thing is, muddling through isn't going to work in terms of reversing or even slowing the climate crisis. That was my aha revelation, my big takeaway from the conversation I had with all of you on the topic last spring. When I relayed this to members of the congregation's environmental action group recently, they let me know there's a common understanding of the muddling through approach. It's called winning too slowly. In other words, you might still get there, but by the time you do, it'll be too late. As our own Sherry Watson has said, even people who accept climate change and that it is a crisis requiring urgent action may still feel distant from it. The wildfires, the floods, the more frequent tornadoes and hurricanes, the melting glaciers, the droughts, they are all somewhere else. It won't be until the effects of these disasters affect food production, that affect what is on the grocery shelves or not, and at what price, that it will hit home. And then, Sherry concludes, it will be too late. Of course, the results of the climate crisis are not things we see aired on TV. The fires and floods in Western and Eastern Canada last year affected thousands, if not tens of thousands of Canadians. I have to expect that there are some of you who know those who have family who were directly affected. The scenes I watched on the news reminded me of driving through an area in Northern California several years ago after wildfires came close to the area where my mother's family used to ranch. From the road, the ranch land looked untouched, but then just 5 miles down the road, the fire devastation began. And several miles away, a small town was completely wiped out. This is Middleton, California. The brick buildings downtown turned into crumbling facades. While I can't say that those fires were caused by climate change, it is clear that the record high temperatures in the days before the Lytton, BC fire that started at the end of last June, those high temperatures were directly related to climate change. They wouldn't have reached that high, record highs, if it hadn't been for global warming. Moving on to the other side of the world, the fires that raged in before the fires raged in southern Australia 2 years ago now, my stepson's best friend and his wife moved there. The fires were mostly extinguished when CJ went to visit, but in all of the 100 of pictures he took of the trip that he posted to Google, I don't remember any showing the sun. Ash and smoke permeated each and every one. Many, if not most of you, will have your own stories like that, if not stories of firsthand accounts. So what are we to do? We know there's a profound problem. We know it's complex. Well, we know quite a bit about what we can do. The question is just what combined will we can bring forward. We're so used to proverbially kicking the can down the street, no one wants to be the first one to pick it up. Where is the will to protect the livability of our home for our future generations? Confession time. Mine's been on the back burner. Other concerns have felt more immediate. When I was in the States, well, there was Trump, there was Trumpism, and then there was COVID. Well, there is still Trumpism, there is still Trump. And even more of that Trumpism is visible north of the border here than before. And it seems we're beginning to change our approach to COVID, counting on vaccinations and booster shots rather than masking mandates and social distance protocols. My guess is that if hospitalization rates remain low, that will be the plan going forward. So maybe it's time to take another look at what we can do in the struggle against climate change. Years ago, I remember reading a luncheon story from a senior colleague, David Bumbaugh. Bumbaugh was sitting at a table near where two women were talking. His ears perked up when he caught one saying to the other, "You sound like a Unitarian." Unitarian? Never heard of them. What do they believe in? Pause. Well, I'm not sure all of it, but I know they believe in recycling. Now, this was before cycling was practiced widely in the States. And when I preached that once, years ago, it got a good laugh. And I realized that over Zoom and north of the border, where you're taking climate change more seriously than many in the States, I don't know what your response will be. The thing is, the communities have now been recycling for some time. It is not, and hasn't been for a while, the cutting edge. The question before us now is, what's next? What's the next big step that needs taking? Talking recently with a sustainable agricultural community researcher, an admittedly grandiose way of saying my Uncle Ken, he told me about a Quaker friend of his and what that friend and Society of Friends were doing. The man's Quaker meeting house had just begun talking about implementing a self-imposed carbon tax. Now, one faith community doing something like that wouldn't do much. But what if they found other faith communities willing to do the same? Maybe that could be a way to focus people's attention. Now, we here in Ottawa already pay a carbon offset. Frankly, I don't know what might best captures people's attention and help motivate more responsible treatment of our planet. But that's the big question before us right now. In my remarks last spring in honor of the 51st Earth Day, I thought back to a spot of land my high school friends and I would retreat to. We called it Thor's Wrath. Thor's Wrath was several acres of land between two suburban subdivisions. One had been built in the 50s, the other likely in the mid to late 70s. Thor's Wrath was full of mounds of dirt and gullies between them. Here and there you'd find the base of faded trees, roots suspended perpendicular to the rest of the ground. It had once been a wood and was now a wasteland. There may have been some development there once, or perhaps it became the repository of crumbled foundations elsewhere, because you did not run through Thor's wrath. To do so risked falling on a grass-covered hunk of concrete and rebar. It's been decades since I've last been to Thor's wrath. I can only imagine that someone has graded it and built new homes there now. Seeing it then, it was easy to imagine how a god of the natural world would rage at what was then made of it. If we had been more in tune with feminist theology back then, we might have called it Callie's bane. As Wendell Berry puts it, there are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. The scrubland we called Thor's wrath had been desecrated, that's for sure. Thinking back to that place, Thor's wrath or Callie's bane, I found myself wishing there was a vengeful deity to right this and so many other wrongs. But maybe we don't need a deity. We have Greta Thunberg, after all. And at that point, just under a year ago now, I went on to quote Ms. Thunberg, "Yet isn't it an abdication of responsibility to hand over any of our combined responsibility to anyone else, especially someone who just turned 19 early last month?" Ms. Thunberg and other climate justice advocates of all ages are exemplars and deserve our deepest gratitude. But they deserve more than that as well. They deserve partners, allies, co-conspirators, partners in crime, if you will. They deserve the rest of us doing our share. If they have inspired us in any way, it is our turn to rise as they have chosen to do. We owe them that respect at least. Friends, it is our turn to rise. It is our turn to take the next step forward, whatever it may be. What will it be? What will capture the attention of those like me, knew that if I wasn't part of the solution, I was part of the problem? Here in our faith communities, we're looking into possibilities such as solar panels and/or electric car chargers. Environmentally friendly construction is a start. Electric car chargers are a start. But can we also, beyond continuing to add more, see if we might begin to capture our own or anyone else's attention by inviting subtraction? There is a parallel at play here between some of our most crucial challenges facing our culture. Those with unearned privilege are being called on to use their power in imaginative ways as allies to those from communities that have not had as much privilege at their disposal. And in some cases, we, because I recognize that I am a member of the group which enjoys privileges I and we did not earn, we're being asked to share our privilege. We're being asked to let go of it, to hand it over for a change. And that is a really hard thing to do, to let go of agency, to let go of power, to let go of privilege. But that's what we have to begin practicing. We may never get it right, it may never feel grateful, but we have to begin practicing letting go. I've learned that in addition to the 3 R's that I was raised with, reduce, reuse, recycle, there is now a 4th R in the series, recalibrate. To take another look at how we might live more simply. Do we need to board a plane for our next vacation, for example. In the reading he shared with us earlier, the best things we can do are to live car-free, avoid air travel, eat a plant-based diet, don't waste food, ditch single-use plastic, and push for earth-friendly policies. We're not here to save the earth, my friends. The earth will go on long after humanity is done. We're trying to protect the ecosphere for ourselves and our children and our children's children. Isn't it time to hold one another accountable? To hold each other accountable for how we treat the only home we'll ever have. I encourage all first-year members to take part in our community's climate survey and mark March 25th on your calendars. We're preparing now for a large participation in Ottawa's Climate Challenge March that day, just over a month from now. In the words of my Tongan classmate, we have our work cut out for us. Let's rise to the challenge as only we can. May it be so. Amen.
Thank you, Eric. I wanted to take a moment to introduce today's anthem. The piece you're about to hear is Frobasher Bay by James Gordon, an arrangement by Tamarack. Phrobasher Bay is an inlet in the Davis Strait, and it's a folk song. It's a beautiful and haunting story of a whaling boat that gets hit by a storm as the bay is icing over. And unable to escape, they slowly freeze over the winter in the bay. You'll hear in it an expression of the power of storms and extreme weather, the kind of which are becoming more common in the face of climate change, and the human impact of that on these people as they're stranded there. This was recorded by Three Rivers in the fall. Thank you.
As you may know, we've not been collecting Sunday service offerings for almost 2 years. Yet during the continuing pandemic, we rely on your generosity as much as ever. Wherever and whenever you are watching this, you are invited to go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how to make a donation or keep up with your pledge. Our gifts are freely given and gratefully received. We dedicate these gifts to the work of this community of faith, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, and loving one another. And now, our closing hymn, We Celebrate the Web of Life. Jen?
We celebrate the web of life, its magnitude we sing, for we can see divinity in every living thing. A fragment of the perfect whole in cactus and in quail, as much in tiny barnacle as in the great blue whale. Of ancient dreams we are the sum, our bones link stone to star, and bind our future worlds to come with worlds that were and are. Respect the water, land, and air which gave all creatures birth. Protect the lives of all that share the glory of the earth.
Thank you, Jen. Before we begin to close this time of worship and reflection, a reminder that our hospitality hour will begin at 11:30. Between now and then, you may want to take a screen break or watch the music videos we'll host here before hospitality hour begins. The choice is yours. As we prepare to extinguish our chalice and move toward the conclusion of this time of worship and inspiration, let these words by Ruben Alves be our guide. So let us plant dates, even though we who plant them will never eat them. We must live by the love of what we will never see. This is the secret discipline. It is the refusal to let our creative act be dissolved away by our need for immediate sense experience, and is a struggled commitment to the future of our grandchildren. This morning's chalice is extinguished, but our connections and our faith remain. With that said, Jen, please, will you bless us once more?
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Murder me d'espoir, de justice, tenue dis-moi, ciel emporte-moi, source de vie, viens vers moi, viens vers moi.
Before we begin to close this time of worship and reflection, a reminder that our hospitality hour will begin at 11:30 I think I've said that, forgive me. Let us reach out in the ways that we can to one another this morning. My friends, go in peace, go in love, go in joy, practicing the art of showing the depth of your love, the commitment of your love, so it is more likely that all may be well. We will see you again at 11:30, and now our postlude.